She was sleeping in 1-4C, her head resting against the cool airplane window as the faint hum of the engines vibrated through the fuselage. The flight had been uneventful so far, a long transatlantic crossing that lulled passengers into the soft rhythm of drowsiness, snacks, and the occasional turbulence. For her, sleep had come as a welcome relief. She had been traveling for nearly 2 weeks already, hopping from base visits to civilian airports, caught between the demands of work and the exhaustion of constant movement. Though dressed in casual jeans and a hoodie, nothing about her demeanor suggested the years she had spent in the Army or the hundreds of hours she had logged in the cockpit of an Apache helicopter. To her fellow passengers, she was simply another woman traveling alone, a weary figure in seat 1-4C. Somewhere over the Atlantic, a quiet slumber was interrupted by a voice that jolted not just her, but the entire cabin. The captain's tone came over the intercom, strained but controlled, betraying the urgency behind his words. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain. If there are any Apache pilots on board, please make yourselves known immediately." For a brief moment, there was silence, disbelief spreading row by row as passengers exchanged confused glances. Apache pilots. It sounded more like the beginning of a riddle than an actual emergency announcement. Yet the urgency was real, and the words echoed in her ears. Pulling her fully awake, her training had conditioned her to respond before thinking. She sat upright, blinked away the fog of sleep, and instinctively assessed. Why would a commercial captain need an Apache pilot? The machines were worlds apart, one a heavily armed attack helicopter, the other a massive airliner carrying hundreds of civilians. But she knew one truth. Captains didn't make such calls unless the situation was dire. She pressed the call button above her seat. Flight attendants hurried toward her aisle, their faces pale, clearly aware of something the passengers did not. Yet no. When she identified herself, quietly former Army, Apache redded. The relief that washed over their features was unmistakable. As she followed them toward the cockpit, dozens of eyes tracked her steps, whispers rising in her wake. Passengers clutched their armrests tighter, realizing that whatever was happening was not routine. She walked with measured calm, though inside, adrenaline was beginning to spike, the familiar rush before facing the unknown. The cockpit door opened, and the captain turned to her with a mixture of hope and desperation. His co-pilot was visibly shaken, scanning instruments nervously. One glance at the displays told her the story. They had lost multiple navigation systems. And worse, the captain's ability to control certain hydraulic functions was compromised. It wasn't a total systems failure, but it was close enough to terrify any pilot. They needed someone who could think unconventionally. Someone trained in combat to improvise with whatever remained operational, the captain explained quickly, his words clipped and urgent. He didn't need someone who could fly a bowing straight. Out of training school, he needed someone who could handle chaos, who understood the feel of a machine when its controls became unpredictable. Apache pilots were bred for that exact environment. While an airliner was not a helicopter, the principles of flight, hydraulics, and emergency procedures were universal enough to bridge the gap. She absorbed every detail with the calm intensity, drilled into her over years of flying missions in hostile skies. Her fingers traced the controls, mentally cross-referencing with the Apache systems she knew so well. In those moments, she was no longer the anonymous passenger in 14C. She was Captain Miller, U.S. Army, retired, Apache instructor, and combat veteran of 2 tours. The years melted away, leaving only the mission at hand. Save the aircraft, save the souls aboard. Working with the crew, she devised a strategy. Look, a pilot would maintain basic navigation while she focused on stabilizing the compromised hydraulic inputs. It was delicate, requiring micro-adjustments and a kind of intuitive control that few outside of combat pilots could manage. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she coaxed the massive airliner to respond, speaking in calm, clipped instructions to the others. The cabin crew relayed updates to the passengers, who sat in tense silence, some praying, others staring out into the endless ocean below. As hours dragged into what felt like minutes, the coastline finally appeared on the horizon. Relief mingled with dread. The hardest part was yet to come. Landing an airliner under partial hydraulic control was akin to guiding a wounded bird to perch safely on a narrow ledge. Every motion risked overcompensation, every adjustment carried the potential for disaster. She drew upon muscle memory, the thousands of hours spent guiding Apaches through dust storms, over mountains, under fire. Those instincts translated now, her hands steady as they worked the controls with the captain. The descent was shaky, alarms blaring intermittently as the aircraft shuddered, but her voice remained calm. She reminded the crew that panic had no place in a cockpit. As the runway drew closer, she focused on one singular thought. They would land. They would walk away. They would live. The aircraft touched down rough, bouncing once, but she corrected swiftly, bringing the jet to a grinding, trembling stop on the tarmac. For a second, the cabin was silent, breath held in collective disbelief. Then, as the realization set in, a wave of applause, cheers, and sobs rolled through the aircraft like a tide breaking free. Back in her seat, long after the chaos had subsided, she sat quietly, hands still trembling slightly. She wasn't the type to seek attention or applause. For her, it was simple. She had been trained for moments like these, even if she never expected them to happen on a civilian flight. To the hundreds of passengers who walked off the plane alive, she was no longer just the woman in 14C. She was the one who had answered the call. In the days and weeks that followed, her name surfaced in headlines, though she tried to keep her life private. Friends and former colleagues reached out, proud but unsurprised. They had always known her as steady under pressure, the one who would run toward the problem when others ran away. To her, it was just another mission. It's different from the ones in dusty war zones, but carrying the same weight. Protect lives. Make. At home, she never forgot that strange awakening mid-flight. The surreal words that had pulled her from sleep. Any Apache pilots on board? It became a story she would carry for the rest of her life, not as a badge of honor, but as a reminder that skills honed in the most unexpected corners of life could one day mean the difference between tragedy and survival.